Thank you for joining me for another episode of Awaken and Power TV. I'm your host, Ethann Fox. Today I'm joined by Jim Vieira. We speak about his research into ancient civilizations, in particular, focusing on the discovery of giants in all parts of the world, in particular in the United States and in European countries, and how they're related to many of the ancient gods and goddesses that we hear about in ancient Egypt and Atlantis and many of the cultures around the world. We speak about these beings and their history and some of the discoveries that have been made in recent times, as well as how these discoveries have been covered up by our mainstream society and archaeology. We further delve into consciousness-related topics and the preservation of sexual energy and how to develop consciousness to a more advanced state in our present time. So a lot of very interesting topics. I also want to mention we have our Awaken Empowered Expo coming up this November 10th, 11th, and 12th in Detroit, Michigan in 2017. And that'll be at the beautiful Doubletree Hilton in downtown Detroit. We'll have a lot of very interesting topics, including topics relating to archaeology, consciousness, different spiritual topics, as well as health and healing, longevity, Chinese herbalism, quite a few things, classes and workshops on aura reading. I also want to mention we have a summer program that we're planning for next summer in 2018, which is the next stage of our Conscious Youth program, which is a kids program we've had for kids who are either gifted in some way or want to develop their spiritual gifts. And the summer program will be a very fun, mystical kind of environment, sort of like in the Harry Potter movies, but we're going to teach them actual tools that they can use to develop their spiritual gifts, and for those who have them already, to help them to understand them and to develop them further. So there'll be very interesting classes such as channeling and mediumship and telekinesis and healing, as well as some programs for the parents if the parents want to learn how to help children who have these kinds of gifts. And we'll be bringing in some very advanced teachers from all over the place to teach these classes, so the kids will have exposure to some really high-level education in these areas. So look for that to come out. And if you'd like, you can follow us on Facebook. Just type in Flower of Life or Awaken Empowered Expo or Conscious Youth, and you'll find our various Facebook pages for these programs. So when we announce them, you can get involved in that. So a lot of interesting things coming down the line, so stay tuned for those. But for today, I'd like to bring on Jim Vieira, and we can continue our conversation about ancient civilizations. Hi, Jim. Welcome to Awaken and Power TV. It's a pleasure to have you with me today. I'm looking forward to hearing about all of your research and findings. But first of all, where are you calling from today?
Ashfield, Massachusetts.
Great. And, well, I'd like to start really learning more about your history and your background, and even when these interests began, what your childhood was like, anything that would be relevant that would give us an idea of the journey that you took from then to moving into this very unique field of research.
Very unique is right. Let's see. I grew up in Boston. I have three brothers. My dad worked at the shipyards. He was a World War II vet who fought in Berlin for the U.S. Army, actually. And I remember he used to read us books about mysteries and haunted lighthouses, and Edward Rowe Snow books about pirates in Boston Harbor. And it really got my curiosity and my love of mystery going at an early age, and my love of reading Robert Frost and all the classics. And, actually I started reading Stephen King voraciously when I was a young teenager, and that got me into the whole world of just reading. And I became a voracious reader for, continues to this day. But I also would open up to these mysteries for some reason. Like I would watch In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, or I would just see the pyramids of Stonehenge, and it would spark some interest in me. And in my late teens, I started getting into Edgar Cayce in his material, the great clairvoyant Edgar Cayce, which I found really compelling. And I went to UMass. I studied economics there and spent a lot of time studying Native American spirituality and Sufism and Taoism and esoteric sources. I just always wanted to learn about as much as I could and evaluate everything on its merit based on my experience. So I went from there and started to get into more esoteric research and deeper research. And being a stonemason, I spent a lot of time searching the woods and combing through the records, trying to make this case that Native Americans built stonework in New England, which isn't totally accepted by archaeologists yet. But we know in different parts of the country, in this country, Native Americans built fabulous stone structures. So I basically just had this love of stone, this love of Native history, started to learn about the mound builders in Cahokia and all these incredible geometric forms that the Native Americans built. And then by accident, by virtue of looking tangentially at another matter, stone structures and other Native American historical accounts, I started to encounter all these accounts of giant skeletons by respected professionals buried obscurely in town and county histories. So that opened up a new avenue for me. You know, I'd heard of giants in the past and religious documents and myths and legends, and I didn't pay them much credence. But I started to see these accounts of a stationary object being measured by respected, oftentimes professional people of the time over a vast amount of not only real estate, but time. And I started to question the validity of these accounts and really to see the no-nonsense, straightforward reporting of an otherwise pretty anomalous and crazy phenomena all around the country, once again in an era of inefficient communication. So that got me moving in this direction of having more curiosity about ancient mysteries.
So tell me about these findings of these giant skeletons that you found. What were the physical characteristics that, especially the ones that are unique to them, that human beings don't possess today?
A lot of the accounts are even in the Smithsonian records, I'll add, that the Smithsonian ethnology reports from the late 1800s, they mentioned 7 foot and taller skeletons over 17 times at least. That's their scientists in the field coming back with these reports. And there's also reports of massive jawbones that would fit over the face. Now, this isn't just sensationalist New York Times articles. It's buried obscurely in town and county histories, jawbone over the face. Double rows of teeth are mentioned oftentimes, too, even in the Smithsonian ethnology reports. And archaeological, anthropological bulletins. So you have massive, like proportioned skeletons, sometimes elongated skulls, like the Adena elite who lived in eastern part of the country from about 1000 BC to 500 AD. You find massive bone structure, massive jaw bones. A lot of the reports are like these people were trained like athletes almost. And this isn't a wide population. This is like the royal elite, the people found in burial mounds, like the Adena, who were reported to be over 7 foot tall for on the male side, and oftentimes even larger, and well over 6 feet for the female side. And I will say that all the explorers you can name, from John Smith to Coronado to Magellan, they encountered giant native rulers from Patagonia to Virginia in the 15, 16, 1700s. And, you know, Tuscaloosa in Alabama, 7.5 to 8 foot tall. So we're talking about what appears to be, at the very least, a royal class of huge Native American people that come from various sources, not just one source or one record. So you have, you know, and the question you asked, I think, is like, you have something like double rows of teeth being reported from Martha's Vineyard here in Massachusetts out into Scientific American in 1865 in Catalina Island, California. So it's like, was there a vast network of communication and handwritten notes to say, oh, we're going to run this 100-year hoax and we're going to point out this bizarre anomaly, right? That doesn't make sense to a researcher. It didn't make sense to me. It's like, there's more to the story than we're told, is what it strikes a chord in me as.
And these discoveries, were they primarily in North America, or what parts of the world have you seen these?
That's a good question. In Europe, in Italy, England, France, hundreds and hundreds of more accounts. I will say myself, other researchers like Hugh Newman, my co-author, Micah Ewers, Ross Hamilton, Fritz Zimmerman. There's a lot of guys who have their own take, whether they're Mormon or Christian or have more of a new age spirituality behind it. There's just a lot of people who spent a lot of time researching these things, and there's been over 1,000 accounts, and there's accounts all over the Holy Land. There are matter-of-fact accounts. They're digging a burial mound around Stonehenge in 1784, and they record a 9-foot 4-inch skeleton at Salisbury. What do you make of that? A stationary object that is recorded by a respected individual of the time, even if they're not a trained anthropologist today. But there are plenty of trained anthropologists and archaeologists who reported the same thing. So it's a really compelling case, and you find it everywhere. And I'm not a believer in academic conspiracies. It's not like, they're all being covered up. If I'm sure we'll have time to get into, there's a lot of people who have a lot of theories about the Smithsonian, and I'll give my 2 cents there. But I just believe it's one of those things that in the late 1800s, it was religion versus science. There was a real power struggle. And ideas of a great flood or giants, they fly in the face of evolution or conventional theory. So it's like there is no entertaining of these ideas. But as we see now with the Younger Dryas impact theory, the Clovis comet, there's a lot of hard science that's showing that there was a celestial impact 12,800 years ago on the ice sheet in North America that caused a massive flood. And we're also starting to see lots of strange anthropological finds that have been coming up, from hobbits in Indonesia to new species, Homo naledi in South Africa, the red cave deer people in China. There's a lot of strange anthropological stuff that's going on that's opening the door to more possibility. Now, I lean on science. I work professionals. I've been blessed to work with archaeological teams in all my shows. I'm not discounting science. I'm not discounting evolution. I am entertaining, through comparative analysis, a coexisting reality in these fields, like catastrophism in geology and uniformitarianism, and evolution as a real activity or a reality, mixed with possible some genetic intervention 200,000 years ago to create Homo sapiens. So I'm going off of the mystics and the oral traditions and the religious documents that are all saying the same bizarre thing, which I'm sure we'll get into. I don't want to be too long-winded, but I'm trying to meet in the middle with science and mystery. I'll bring mystery to science.
Now, the Younger Dryas was 12,500 years ago then, and we're seeing evidence of some of these beings with very tall stature, even a few thousand years ago and sooner. What happened to them since then? What are they still? Do you believe that they are still people like that on the planet?
There are some, this goes further and further, and different people, or deeper and deeper, I should say. There's David Wilcock and Corey, what's Corey's name? Corey Good, Steve Quayle. There are a lot of people who have a lot of different theories. I'll say myself that, going off the Native American legends, a lot of what was claimed by Vine Deloria, the great scholar, and other Native peoples, was that giants existed in the late Pleistocene era. That it wasn't that giants were part of the population, if you will, and that they were oftentimes categorized as malevolent, cannibalistic. And if you go to the Bible or you go to other religious sources or esoteric sources, they talk about the Great Flood not only sinking the lost continent of Atlantis, but killing off the giants. And you go to Tiwanaku and Pumapunku and you talk to the indigenous people there, and they tell you the same thing. There was a great flood. My ancestors told me that. I've sit in ceremonies with shamans and have heard the most bizarre stories, or at least seemingly bizarre. And I think there's two stories going on. One is that after the Younger Dryas cometary impact of 12,800 years ago, you have the great civilizers who show up, the tall bearded beings that showed up after the flood. Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, you have it in ancient Sumeria in Egypt, and they are part, theoretically, of a bloodline of much taller people who are benevolently oriented. Now, Ross Hamilton would say, and I probably agree with him, that Native Americans carry this bloodline in a royal interbreeding, and that's why you find this bloodline, elongated skulls, certain characteristics that lasted even up until the 1600s. And then obviously the colonization took place and all the terrible genocide and everything that happened in North and South America kind of wiped out native peoples to a large extent, which is brutally unfortunate. And you have a situation where it seems to be two stories going on. Because one thing is Vine Deloria got together all these native elders, and they had a conference about their oral traditions of giants and little people. And he gathered a lot of these stories, which are fascinating. And they read just like stories you will find all around the world in isolated Pacific islands, stories of little people and giants, whether you go to Ireland. It's the most bizarre thing. The Rosicrucians, Freemasons, Madame Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner, Edgar Cayce, oral traditions around the planet, Plato, and religious documents essentially say the same thing, that not every last bit of what I'm going to say, but they line up with 80, 90, or 100% of this, that androgynous created gods 200,000 years ago in the lost continent of Atlantis created the human race. And they were long-lived, 800, 1,000-year-old beings that got caught in matter. And giants and little people were part of that civilization. And then there was a great flood 12,000 years ago, and then some of the wisdom keepers spread out around the globe. Now, as bizarre as that sounds, Plato says the same thing, and all these sources specifically say this, all these bizarre characteristics about the human race. And then you go to Laventa, the 1800 BC site in the Olmec culture, and Quetzalcoatl, he has this crazy man bag, and he was born of androgynous parents. And you go to Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe, and there are man bags there from that 12,000-year-old site. And then you go all around the world, and the created gods who showed up after the flood in Sumeria everywhere have these strange man bags. It is beyond chance. And as a historical detective, I just cannot just throw that away, that it's not just like, oh, everybody has these strange bags. It's like they're created gods, birthed by androgynous beings. They are repromulgating civilization. They are engaged in a transfer of technology that Graham Hancock talks about a lot. It's a pretty deep story that has to do with the Great Flood and a cometary impact also. So I will say that what I'm proposing as an alternative view of history, or view of history, answers all the strange questions of myth and legend. And as much as I love science, it really doesn't answer any of them at this present time. So in 50 years, I tend to think that this version of reality, of the origins of humanity that I just laid out, will be more broadly accepted than what we think this present day about science. And that's not a diss to science, because science will have to answer these things and will have to be proven in a way that follows a scientific method. But I will say, let's use these sources to point us in the right direction.
Now, I've seen the bags you're talking about. Do you believe that those are actually bags, or could it have been technology, or maybe even a coat of arms that suggests the connection between the different beings around the world that were pictured this way?
It's a good question. If I had a time machine, I'd answer that. It could be psilocybin. It could be the acacia tree. It could be DMT. One thing, I've had no problem sitting with the indigenous wisdom keepers all around the planet, going down to Ecuador and Peru, doing ayahuasca ceremonies in an attempt to figure out the mind of the mystic, what the shamans are talking about. And I will, reporting back from a multidimensional state, I will tell you that reality is much more bizarre than we think. It is not what we think. It is actually much more benevolent and connected, thankfully. But at the same time, I believe that direct connection with something larger is the most important thing any being can convey to another civilization in the future. So by virtue of that, it may be some hallucinogenic substance that is in the bag, that is a representative idea. And the honest truth is, whether it's psilocybin or DMT or ayahuasca, where do these substances come from? And all these shamanic peoples, even back to 30, 40,000 years ago, they keyed in on these substances. They figured out what they meant. It almost seems like they were seeded here from another place of higher consciousness to help humanity wake up. And you see right now where ayahuasca is just burgeoning everywhere. Everybody is traveling down to Peru and Ecuador and going through this rather difficult ceremony. It's not like unicorns and rainbows. It is a brutal. All my experiences have been extremely horrendous around ayahuasca that reveal something larger, but deal with a lot of intense trauma and psychological difficulty. So these substances are not to be messed with, and you need to do a lot of initiatory work before you get there. They're not for everyone. But at the same time, I can report back that this might be what these man bags are all about. That's kind of what my intuition is telling me, that they're talking about a substance that connects vicariously, the human with the larger.
So you've been to South America to go through these rituals. Now, in the United States, it's becoming quite popular for shamans to perform those here. Is there a difference between doing it here versus there?
No, not really. It has a quasi-legal status. There was a Supreme Court case a couple of years ago, and in fact, the DEA had to, I think a place in Oregon, had to return the shipment several times of ayahuasca because it's a religious sacrament. So there are Sante Dame churches. There are places to go to do it in the United States. Especially with the turn of the tide here in the U.S. and good old Jeff Sessions running the Justice Department. These are things you want to keep on the DL, but I would encourage people to at least explore the idea and think about them. I don't see a lot of Westerners are like, I have to go in with the Schwa people and go into the rainforest and have this experience. No, you don't. You need a teacher or a shaman who they come up here to, or a Westerner who's been trained in the shamanic traditions to be a good facilitator, to be the tour guide to help you through your experience, to make sense of it for you, and to calm you down and help you when the ride gets rough. So no, it's not much different at all. You want to be engaged with the person who has the experience with the medicines and is competent. And that usually comes, through word of mouth. You understand that you're dealing with a professional who is there. But yeah, the setting does not change the experience. I can report that.
So it sounds like you believe essentially that Atlanteans and these various god beings that were spoken of around the world were of a taller stature and of a much higher consciousness. So is there any validity to the opposite viewpoint that there were malevolent giants?
Well, both. When you get into Edgar Cayce's material, he talks about that. He talks about the fall of Atlantis. It's very, very interesting what he says. He talks about there were two factions, the sons of Belial, Baal, as we know from the Phoenician god Baal, and Baal is in the Bible too. And then you have the sons and daughters of the Law of One, which is pretty straightforward. The beings that you can see incarnate at this point in time. Excuse me, once again, people oriented to the good of all. I hopefully like to think of myself that way, rather than oriented towards service to the self, which becomes corrupted and just goes nowhere, as we all know. So these two factions, were at war with each other. And Cayce lays out all these interesting things about what happened in Atlantis, that basically this prototype, the body that we have, was the chosen one for Homo sapiens. But in Atlantis, there were little people and giants as part of the population. And you have all these religious documents that talk about giants who were malevolent, essentially. And I can believe that. I can believe that 12, 15, 20,000 years ago, there was an anthropological curveball that was going on, a zoological nightmare, a lot of strange things that you see in the chimeras and all the imagery of all these ancient civilizations in Egypt and everywhere else. So I think there's a valid point to be made there. And you get into religious documents like the Bible. Now, as an investigator, I could say that's an interesting historical document. I cannot say it is like the Word of God and it's unassailable and incontrovertible, because I do find distortion and contradiction in the Bible. But that doesn't mean there isn't higher intelligence there too. I like to do a comparative analysis. I cannot overemphasize one source. No, I don't want to knock anyone, but if your orientation is I have to prove the Bible is correct, then you get involved in agenda. And then you whistle past the graveyard. You don't look at both sides of an argument. And what we have in these controversies is we have pseudo-skeptics and we have true believers who don't want to meet in the middle and entertain both sides of an argument. And personally, I'm a stonemason by trade. I don't make my living doing conferences or writing books. I do it out of a love for it, and it certainly doesn't pay the bills, but it's really interesting, and I get to share a lot of what I find interesting research with people. So I divorce myself from agenda, I try to be objective. I work with professionals. I speak at universities, but I'm the goodwill ambassador from the lunatic fringe, because I have no problem saying that. I really believe that a lot of these mythological and legendary realities are true.
Now, have you actually physically seen any of these remains, or are you basing your research on the findings of other researchers that you've studied?
Well, yeah, pictures, records, yes. Physical remains, a 7-foot 6-inch skeleton, the Muddy Museum in Kentucky, in Philadelphia from Kentucky. Part of the problem is that because of the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act of 1990, these remains went back in the ground in the United States. So, once again, I don't want to promulgate this myth about academic conspiracy, but I do want to say that science may have missed out on an episode where these burial mounds and burial places of Native Americans had not been touched in over 10,000 years. And all these white settlers came in and unearthed, oftentimes in a very, very disrespectful fashion, just went through and dug into burial mounds for 150 years, documenting the most bizarre finds, not only anatomical features, but enormous heights that are almost, beyond comprehension to believe, 9 and 10 feet tall, over and over again. And, a lot of them crumbled to dust. The Smithsonian scientists talked about that as well, uncovered this massive skeleton. It was so ancient from this crypt, it just crumbled to dust, and we were, horrified that this skeleton was gone. But a lot of them were on display, Miamisburg, Ohio, and all these places, like 8-foot 6-inch skeletons. The town is abuzz. And that's where you get into the strangeness of this whole story. It's like, really, where are those remains now? These, respected academic institutions had them on display. The president, the archaeologist is reporting them. And I don't want to play that game, they all vanish, but I do want to push back against the idea that, like, oh, these are all, you're being taken in by a fantasy or hallucination or something like that, because this is not the case. These are not mastodon bones. There may be mismeasurements, they may be regression formula miscalculations and some amateurism, but this isn't all that. This is a strange phenomena that was reported over a vast period of time by respected professionals and townspeople. And like I said, the town is abuzz over and over again. It's a really, really compelling story. And it lines up with all these other sources, and it lines up with other parts of the world, the same thing being reported. So, I don't ask, oh, you have to believe me. I'd ask, is it worthy of further investigation? Certainly it is. No question in my mind.
And how far back has there been any kind of dating or anything done as far as determining how far back these giants actually coexisted with human beings?
Mm-hmm. I would say, as far as what was unearthed in the context of the cultures that lived in the United States, several thousand years. You have the Adena people, like I said, they showed up on the scene. They're very interesting people. They were the ancient engineers who built incredible burial mounds and had elongated skulls that royal class did. They were massive and had massive bone structure. And they essentially showed up in the Ohio River Valley about 1000 BC. And archaeologists and anthropologists don't really know what to make of them. The Hopewell people after them were of a normal stature for the most part, but the Adena were particularly tall. And Edgar Cayce, in fact, says that the Adena people were oriented to the law of one. They were from an Atlantean bloodline who had particularly large royal class, and they escaped the death cults, the sacrifices that were taking place in Mesoamerica at the time. And Cayce says in Atlantis that they would sacrifice flowers on altars, and the altars were sacrificial. You would sacrifice the false self, the separate self, all the fear and the hatred and the jealousy. You would do rituals to sacrifice that. That was what the function of the ancient temples were for. But then the sons of Belial, he would say, turned it and perverted it into human sacrifice. And then, as we know, what happened down in Mesoamerica, this whole thing turned where humans were sacrificed for the good of all, or the good of the society, rather than sacrificing kind of the separate and false self. And then the Adena people escaped that. They wanted to create more of a benevolent society. And what's interesting, Greg Little, the researcher, pointed out that in Portsmouth, Ohio, or Portsmouth, Kentucky, there's an old Squire and Davis lithograph of the site. It's now destroyed, and it is built. It was built to look exactly like the central city of Atlantis, Plato's Atlantis, the spitting image. We have it in our book, Giants on Record, and you can get it on the internet or look at Greg Little stuff as well. And Casey said that a lot of these mound sites with moats and mounds and these geometric forms were built as representations of, as a ceremonial, like, remembrance of Atlantis, which is very interesting because you have all these geometric forms that people don't even know about. 1,500 of them, these astonishing, precise, eclipse-predicting geometric forms all over Ohio and other places that were here when the colonists first showed up. And nobody knows what they were for, what they were used for. They're just like, oh, that was ceremonial. But they have these embedded geometric forms and formulas, as well as being representations of Plato's Atlantis, which is just another fascinating term because we don't know much about the mound builders. But we do know they have, these esoteric connections they're very, very curious. I'll say that.
So you're referring to mounds like Serpent Mound in Ohio?
Serpent Mound is one of them. That's aligned to the equinox and the solstice. But beyond that, like Portsmouth, Ohio, Newark, Ohio, the octagon and the circle there, they're aligned to there's a lot of fascinating alignments if you go into that road where the 51.86 angle of the azimuth that basically predicts an eclipse, the 18.61 metonic cycle of the moon at Portsmouth is the same angle you find in the Great Pyramid. You start to find, whoa, was there a worldwide science and geometry and spiritualism? You find man bags everywhere. You find like the swastika everywhere, from the Dalai Lama's perch to, all over the place. Of course, Hitler perverted that. And there's a lot of strange esoteric stuff with the Nazis too. And because one of the things is that these negatively oriented beings, the sons of Belial, were they had this misperception that different races were superior than others. And you see that carried out, it continues to this day. There's a lot of this weird white nationalism in this kind of Atlantis research, that my love of it is kind of love of native culture and love of diversity. So I'm like Bernie Sanders, basically. I'm not a hardliner. I really am kind of disgusted by that idea. So you got to pay attention with these things, as some people really get these weird nationalist views. And the point is that the Nazis were looking for Atlantis. They were reading Blavatsky's stuff. They were looking all over the planet because they believed that part of Atlantis were these elite white, Caucasian, people. So there's all this strangeness mixed in too. I'm not saying that adds to the veracity of it that the Nazis were looking for, but it really reads like a sci-fi movie, And at the end of the day, the most important lesson is they did what our society is doing, tore itself apart, didn't support diversity, didn't care about the well-being of all. And that is for me, that's kind of the spiritual lesson. It's like, I'd love to uncover concrete evidence to say, humanity, you got to wake up. We're doing the same thing. And what are the spiritual lessons we didn't learn? Here you go. And that's what, Casey talked about. There will be initiates who will find the lost records of Atlantis under the paw of the Sphinx or in the Yucatan. And I'm not going to, try to fulfill some mystical vision, but I feel compelled to at least, make shows about these things, write about these things, and be open to these ideas. And, I believe my intuitive mind tells me yes. My hair stands up when I get into certain avenues of investigation. Don't go in with a preconceived notion, hear both sides of an argument, understand the scientific method and what it takes to prove a case, but at the same time, listen to your gut. Like, what are myth and legend for? Well, you know what Jung said. He didn't say something that, these people are superstitious weirdos. He said, the primitive mind does not invent myth. It experiences myth. So it's like, there was something to that. I respect Jung a lot and Joseph Campbell and other comparative mythologists. There was something to these stories that we're all talking about. There is wisdom there. So science in the late 1800s basically discounted oral tradition as a means to draw a scientific conclusion. Robert Heinrich Louis at the National Museum basically pushed aside 10,000 years or more of Native American traditions, oral traditions, because they didn't have the written documents. So it's like, whoa, we just burned the Library of Alexandria by not taking on all these native traditions and listening to them. And that is just such a crime. It's like burning the Maya codices or destroying the Library of Alexandria, which I guarantee you had records of Atlantis and Lemuria in it. But now it is gone. We obfuscate the truth from ourselves. So oral traditions are being verified all around the globe to understand geological forces that go back over 10,000 years. And there's a new study out in Washington State where the Native Americans, their oral traditions predicted tsunami frequency. Where I live here in Western Mass, a geologist went to the native people in the late 1800s in Northampton, Mass. And they heard the story of the petrified beaver, which essentially talks about the draining of Lake Hitchcock 12,000 years ago. He gave a complete, accurate analysis of the geological record. So those people, those native people, passed on that accurate geological rendition of the past. Geologists found out about in the late 1850s. That's a pretty remarkable testament to the veracity of oral traditions with native people and indigenous cultures all around the world.
Well, let's talk about mythology a little bit more. Is there any evidence to suggest that some of these mythological figures, such as Noah in the Bible or King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, were actually of taller stature?
There's certainly reports. That's interesting. We have an article from a newspaper of the finding around Glastonbury and King Arthur's tomb, and they reported him with the sword to be enormously tall, which is funny. And then there was like so many of these accounts, the bones don't end up on display. They kind of go in some mysterious channel. I will say, you go back and all the great chronicles of the time, like Herodotus, they talk about there were bones on display 2,000 years ago that are reminiscent of the late 1800s of just these enormous beings. And you have a biblical figure like Noah, and it's in the esoteric literature. There's all these weird and strange beliefs about the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians. And, I really feel like they were onto something. They go back through the Egyptian mystery schools, and they go back to, which they say themselves, to Atlantis, to the mystery schools of Atlantis. Both showing up in Egypt, being an Atlantean god, basically, an androgynous super being that bestows this on humanity. I do believe there is a lot of, there certainly is mythological evidence of androgynous creative beings that are long-lived, of the demigods, that is this, further entrapment of beings into matter. The myths, the legends, the oral traditions all talk about these beings being long-lived and of giant stature oftentimes, and Noah as well, and Moses. And the Bible is loaded with specific accounts, like we sent out our scouts and they came back and they reported we were as grasshoppers in their sight. There are specific accounts, and there are a million names for these giants in the Bible. And then you have specifically in, I think it's Samuel 21:20, the giant of Gath is noted to have 6 fingers and 6 toes, which is very interesting because you go all around the planet. First, you go all around the United States, and there are petroglyphs of giant hands and giant feet everywhere. The natives had a tradition of the giants with 6 fingers and 6 toes. You hit these isolated South Pacific islands, and all these statues have 6 fingers and 6 toes. And there are just these remarkable accounts all around the globe. You have at Ayin Ghazal in Jericho, in Jordan, 8,000-year-old statue with 6 fingers and 6 toes, on and on and on. So it's a real conundrum how you have such a specific anatomic anomaly being associated with giants and being associated with a supernatural event. And Edgar Cayce also talks about 6 fingers and 6 toes, and esoteric sources also talk about it. And it goes on and on. It's like, as a detective, I would say, if I ignore that, I'm an idiot. And I am loath to get into certain areas of research and study sometimes because I want to hold on to credibility, and then I just drop it. I'm like, I have to go where my instinct tells me. And I don't give a rat's ass if I'm perceived in a particular way. I'm trying to do a comparative analysis of all these sources that are saying the same strange thing over and over again. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in your gut instinct, and I believe in amassing evidence to prove your point. So we'll see. Maybe I'll be looked at as a kook in 50 years, but if you look at Graham Hancock now, he's looking pretty smart. He was derided for like, and he took the brunt of a lot of this. And he's not as out there as I am. And I only say as out there as like, I'm not going to claim to know, his beliefs. He does a lot of ayahuasca ceremonies. He is open to the spiritual side of things, but he's really looking mighty smart right now. I'll tell you, with Göbekli Tepe, with the Younger Dryas impact theory. If anybody wants to hear more about Graham Hancock, Randall Carson did a Joe Rogan interview recently that is fascinating, 3.5 hours. And I just find things changing pretty quickly. And I'm not afraid just to be out there and just to honor my experience.
If you believe that most of these giants, or at least, or maybe all of them, were of a more benevolent race of beings from Atlantis, then what do you make of the biblical stories of the fallen angels creating Nephilim and God eliminating them through the Great Flood as a result of their being more malevolent?
Yeah. I think my Christian friends might not like this, but we don't agree on everything. I think the biblical flood was 12,000 years ago. I really think, you get into the Epic of Gilgamesh. I was at the British Museum. I, saw it firsthand, the old Sumerian tablets. I think we're talking about 12,800 years ago. I think the biblical flood is accurate. And I think the Bible is pointing to what would be perceived as the gods, possibly being some alien intervention. I don't know. I'm not going to claim to know. But my friend L.A. Marzulli, he's a Christian researcher, and he talked about the Bible is talking about supernatural events. You cannot get around that. You must concede that. I must concede that. Somebody who believes in evolution, who sees, Australopithecines turn into the Homo genus and on and on and on. And I just see all the branching. I've spent the last 10 years spending an enormous amount of time working with professionals, studying classical anthropology and archaeology to understand both sides of the argument. So I am pointing to coexisting realities, and I have to tell my friend who's a professor and an anthropologist that, listen, I'm talking about a supernatural occurrence here. So you have, like you said, malevolently oriented giants, if you will, and they end up in the Holy Land. They end up in different places. They existed over 12,000 years ago, but some seem to have survived at the same time, and we hear about them in the Bible, in the Holy Lands up until like 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. So I think there's something to that case, but the case is a supernatural one. It really has to do with, like Madame Blavatsky or Edgar Cayce would say, keeps talking about root races. Like there are these genetic experiments. I could easily see some higher species mixing our genetics to create what we are now. Humans are a very strange species. We're basically destroying our habitat that took billions of years to be created in the blink of an eye. We're constantly at war with each other. We're oriented around biology and overvaluing and misperceiving. It doesn't seem like a benevolent creation. I know humans can present in a very good way, and hopefully there is enlightenment that is occurring around the planet now. But I am not discounting some kind of genetic intervention, and who knows what comes of that. We're at the 11th hour as a species. There's a lot happening that demands our attention, and it's spiritual answers of cooperation, the only things that are going to solve these problems. It is not going to be done through hard, cold science. It's going to have to be done in a way that respects and includes all there is, all life forms too, not just humans.
So it sounds like from our conversation so far, it's pretty fair to assume that most, if not all, of the ancient leader figures that we encounter in ancient history, or even pre-dynastic Egypt and South America and all over the world, and even figures like King Arthur, might have been an entirely different race of beings who were much taller than human beings today. Yes,
and you get into King Arthur. The legendary King Arthur sometimes is thought to be a Saxon king from 200 to 600 AD. I tend to think, he's fighting dragons and he's fighting giants and he's portrayed as enormous. I think these are mythological archetypes that just go pass down the histories. There was so few written documents. Usually they start in Ireland and Scotland, probably 11, 12, 1300 AD. there's a lot of time that passed and oral traditions were passed down. But the resonance, the idea of some of the great heroes and civilization bringers or the great enemies having giant stature, it resonates in the myths and the legends, the oral traditions, and the esoteric teachings as well as the mystics like Edgar Cayce, Steiner, and Blavatsky. So it's in our collective consciousness for a reason. You can't make it go away. There are more books written about Atlantis than probably any other subject in human history. You could say, oh, show me the 30,000-year-old pyramid, but I'm going to say you cannot purge this from human consciousness, this idea of the past, heroes of myth and legend. So, my inclination is to believe there is some truth there. But I think, in Greek mythology, once again, they're hearkening back to the age of Atlantis, I think, all the strange genetic creations. That's what Edgar Cayce said was going on, a zoological nightmare, all these strange chimera. And he said that in Egypt, there were these temples of the Temple Beautiful and the Temple of Sacrifice that was set up like 10,000 years ago to essentially heal these genetic miscreations of strange appendages, And once again, I have like at Left Conde in Iran, 2000 BC, there's a minotaur and it has 6 fingers and 6 toes. And it's just this weird kind of like zoological nightmare.
Now, from what I understand, a lot of these ancient races, they were, and I don't know if this is true or not, but so I'm speculating, but I'm assuming that they didn't really interbreed with humans. They pretty much stayed within their own race. Well, first of all, is that true? And secondly, is there any connection between that and the fact that even in our modern society, we have royal bloodlines and even world leaders who practice a sort of, they're very careful about interbreeding within their own bloodlines?
Yes. I try to see if there's an anthropological connection as well as look at the more esoteric or mythological side of this. We have what was considered anthropological heresy occur recently, where they found out that Denisovans, a new cousin of humans, and Neanderthals all interbred together 40,000 years ago. And they found evidence at the Altai Mountain region, Denisovan Cave. It's in Russia. So the Denisovans are a very strange new species that have just been found. And an obsidian, what's the material? It escapes me right now. But a bracelet was found in the cave that was 40,000 years old, this beautifully crafted bracelet that's 40,000 years old. And so they interbred with humans and Neanderthals. And what they found was the only anthropological evidence was a little piece of a finger bone and 2 massive teeth. The teeth were so massive, they sent it to the Max Planck Institute, and they thought it was a bear cave's tooth. So that opens up a big window of possibility, like Denisovans interbred with humans, and there's a couple percentage points of DNA that's Denisovan. A lot of like South American people, were they part of, like, were they giant? Were they enormous? Well, we're going to find out more of them when more remains are found. But right now, it's a real conundrum. Is there an anthropological link here, or is it more of like a supernatural species thing where there's like this race that was created, which seems strange, but that kept to their own and didn't interbreed? Or is it hidden in plain sight? Is it not genetics? And you talk about, oh, you have Atlantis, but you look at the different haplogroups and the different genetic makeup through mitochondrial DNA, and in Europe, in America, is it out of Atlantis, not out of Africa? Did the human species spread out of Atlantis 200,000 years ago? Quite possibly, and we're looking in the wrong place. We're looking at a Solutrean hypothesis, or we're looking at an anthropological answer. Maybe it is just part of our genetics. Maybe this is basically, we have the same genome as somebody did 200,000 years ago in Atlantis. I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility, because I don't want to whistle past the graveyard and say, that science might not have a role to play in this whole thing, and they're very legitimate questions. Are we talking about like a specific race that is talked about in myth and legend? Did they interbreed? Were this genetic creations, interventions? I wish I had more answers and I had a time machine, but going off of, myth and legend and esoteric sources, there definitely seems to be some supernatural event that occurred. but I can't discount science at the same time. We have to look at new breakthroughs in anthropology and genetics, and we never thought we'd have the human genome, and now we have it. So I think it's what I try to do is coerce professionals to meet in the middle and just say, entertain this possibility. What evidence do I have to show you, or what will we have to look at genetically or through mitochondrial DNA to prove this case, or to make it open to possibility? And all the inquiries are legitimate. It's just it's a conundrum, because you don't have what appears to be normal, evolutionary trajectory going on here. You have what appears to be a strange curveball in evolution and in anthropology. So, I wish I had a firmer answer, but what I could say once again is, can't we have coexisting realities? We have uniformitarianism in geology, and we know that is a truth, and it's a solid reality. We have catastrophism. We know there is truth in that too. The level of catastrophism, we don't know. Some people think a lot, some people think a little, but we know what killed off the dinosaurs. We know these other things occurred. In archaeology, we know that archaeologists have mapped out pretty accurately what happened over the last 10,000 years about domestication and what happened in societies. But did they miss another chapter, a late Pleistocene chapter, in Atlantis, if you will? There seems to be evidence that both things can exist, that archaeologists just need to take that further leap and look back, and then Göbekli Tepe is starting to really, push the boundary there, the 12,000-year-old temple site in Turkey. Now, in anthropology, do we have coexisting realities? Australopithecines, the Homo genus, evolution is certainly a reality, but is there a curveball thrown in? Is there a supernatural event that took place, a genetic intervention? That is the question. Then everybody's happy, or everybody's a little unhappy and happy, but both realities can exist without pushing aside the sciences, without saying, oh, the earth is only 4,000 years old, or this couldn't have occurred. Then you get into these areas where the professional just tunes out. It's like, we have so many reams of data which say that this is true, that say that evolution is occurring. Maybe not like we think, but it's occurring in a certain way. To discount that makes it hard to argue these points and debate them. So I, once again, try to meet in the middle, and I'm open to, both sides of the argument here.
And the other question was, where do you think that the practice of the interbreeding of bloodlines in most royal families, and even beyond that, around the world, where did that originate?
Yes, that's a good question. I would say it was probably a holdover from a lost world, and this is where my friend Brian Forster comes in with his all his research on skull elongation. It's like, that really seems to be part of some royal bloodline, and people take it to be indicating something benevolent or malevolent. I really don't know. I can just go off of the evidence, but it appears that a lot of these royal bloodlines that are giant sized appear to have elongated the skulls, and there's not a lot of argument that skull elongation took place all around the planet in areas that were not connected, that have, was supposed to have no common mother culture that spawned them. Now, that's a dubious claim, I think, because skull elongation is such a bizarre activity. And for all these cultures, the Choctaw people, the Adena people, down in Sonora, all around the world, you have these different groups elongating the skulls, usually of the royal class. That opens a door to this idea that these bloodlines existed, and then you get into the Anunnaki and into the Bible's idea of giants, and it's like, what's going on here? Is this some off-world intelligence interacting with humanity? Quite possibly. All these stories seem to be pointing to that, and it resonates with people too. They don't know what to fully make of it, but like the Anunnaki and the Sumerian texts, the Vedic texts, you get into any deep esoteric wisdom of any of these major religions, and you start to find the same bizarre stories, ancient conflicts and royal bloodlines. I will say that Karen Hughes, the whistleblower, the former lead counsel for the World Bank, came out like 2 years ago, and she specifically said in her interview, she dropped in that elongated skull people or beings have to do or entrenched in the banking and religious centers of the world and had even more influence before the last ice age. And I was like, where does that come from? It was like, it struck me as like this bizarrely true statement, but she said that. I think Hughes is her name, Karen Hughes, in an interview while divulging secrets of financial impropriety. She threw in that about these beings with elongated skulls. So I think we can, anybody who has an open mind, understand there are some strange things going on in the world, and there's some strange happenings and conspiratorial realities that, are just there, So be open to the idea of the founding of human origins being a lot more strange than we think. It's not as cut and dry, I can tell you that. My experience is no way that we didn't just go from a one-celled organism to awakening consciousness, and here we are. It was like evolution is real, but at the start of it all, like Madame Blavatsky would say, there was consciousness, there was understanding, there was the greater being who created all the universe of time and space. It wasn't some cosmic accident with dust and bacteria. That I know to be true. That I will stand by, I will say.
Well, let's talk a little about why a lot of these discoveries are being hidden and not being made available to the public. Now, from what I understand, there's a connection with the Smithsonian and Carnegie Foundation and of course, mainstream philosophy. These institutions and individuals are highly revered and respected, but there seems to be some connection between them and the eugenics organization movement. Can you talk about that and what you believe is the purpose behind that?
Well, certainly at least 100 years ago, you had a head of the Smithsonian Division of Anthropology, Dr. Hrdlicka, who was, pre-Nazi eugenist, particularly zealous, racist, real tough guy to deal with. And in the late 1800s, she basically had, like Native American people were, a price was put on their head, out west. It was, a horrific racist environment. And we're painfully familiar with those realities. And one of the things that happened was that Native American culture at the time, was being pushed aside and marginalized because of manifest destiny. It's like you cannot revere a culture and denigrate it at the same time or push it away, right? You have, this conundrum for the scientists of the time. It was like, giant native people with huge cranial capacity was not part of the eugenics movement. It was, these finds, I believe, were marginalized by the Smithsonian. They were never talked about that. Even in their own records, they have these 36-inch skull circumference reports and these massive bones that were being reported that were native rulers. It was never really talked about. It was just pushed aside, and you had a real racist paradigm in place. So that really inspired me to look into native civilizations. Like, we never learned about Cahokia in school, about the mound builders, about native civilizations. It was always they were nomadic and unsophisticated, not they were extraordinary wizards, if you will, of math and of geometry and engineering. So, you have a racist paradigm. And what happened was you have a stuck way of thinking that basically denigrated anything religious. There's no great flood, there's no giants, basically push away anything else. And it became entrenched. And, I don't view it as a massive, academic conspiracy, because once again, I understand academia better than most people. I work with professionals. I was blessed to be able to go to UMass and study economics, have a lot of professors as friends. I don't see that form of collusion. What I do see is a level of academic filtration. When you don't align with the current paradigm, you're not given funding, you're not given support, you're maligned. With the Clovis theory, the Clovis barrier, you see right now that there is a lot of vindication happening from these professionals who were basically vilified in the past for their beliefs that, there was human activity in the Bluefish Caves in Montana 24,000 years ago. Wait, there's Monte Verde and all these other places. You have professionals who will come out now and talk about, like Todd Dillahay, the archaeologist, and say, the paradigm of archaeology has been set back decades because of all the infighting, all the academic filtration, all the pig-headedness. So I see it as a side effect of human behavior rather than this vast conspiracy. So I encourage professionals to look at evidence that we may have missed. Like, look at the record right here. Look at these reports. Look at these accounts. Even look into oral traditions of Native people to point in the right direction here. That being said, I can imagine some funny business happened at the Smithsonian 100 years ago. And I had a TEDx talk, actually, it was the #1 TEDx talk in the world at the time. It got taken down because what happened was the guy before me was a CEO for Dean's Beans. And he got into this talk about CEOs and basically their sociopathic behavior and how he goes to conferences and he confronts these bankers and other people. He's like, how can you do such vile things and basically justify that? And then they all said, oh, I do it for my family, or, it's not like, I do these kind of sociopathic things, and without conscience, and it's more like they rationalize them. So I was kind of all worked up because I knew part of my presentation was pointing out that the Smithsonian took $50 million from the Koch brothers to basically create permanent installations at the David H. Koch Hall of Human Origins in Washington that obfuscate the truth about climate change. And basically, part of the article that Jane Mayer wrote for the New Yorker about the Koch brothers was that they funded this permanent installation that obfuscated the truth about climate change. And it said that, or it says that at the Smithsonian, that humans may grow into short, compact bodies with curved spines and live underground in the future to deal with the effects of climate change. And they never talked about fossil fuels. They never talked about what's going on here. So I saw the insidious side of science, where science can be basically pushed to believe the craziest things or to promulgate a myth, as having industry be the beneficiary of that. So that's what got my talk removed. I went off on the Koch brothers and everything like that. But so rank and file academic people, I'm not like going to point the finger and say, oh, you're part of a conspiracy. I will say that it's kind of a corrupted way of thinking that isn't including, everything is evidence. It's diminished and pushed aside 10,000 years of evidence, basically, because the native wisdom keeper, doesn't count in my book, which is garbage, So I will say there is fault in science, there is limitation in science, and there is truth in science. Have a discerning, objective mind when reviewing all this evidence to see the truth in it all.
Are you seeing any evidence that suggests that those institutions are becoming a little bit more open and willing to share the research as we go forward?
Yeah, certainly. I think part of it is you're going to make a logical and reasonable case. And I think Graham Hancock, a lot of people should be very thankful for him and Randall Carson to take sound objective science and push the boundaries and intersperse it with myth and legend and try to figure out these things. But do it in a way where you need to meet a certain scientific criteria. Now, you have new studies out, like 130,000-year-old mastodon bone find in San Diego in 1992 has been analyzed further. And now they're believing that there is a tool set there that has humans, probably Denisovans and Neanderthals, in San Diego 130,000 years ago, which is, quite shocking. Even the possibility of that. Now, oddly, I don't really believe that study right now. I believe that it was a bulldozer that crushed the mastodon bones because the tools are so primitive. They're even less primitive than the Floresiensis hobbit finds on the Isle of Flores in Indonesia. So it just doesn't line up to me. And there isn't a lot of that evidence. I'm open to hear it. I'm not going to denigrate the scientists for putting out that report, but I will say science is becoming more and more open. Like last week, a study came out that human origins happened in Europe and not Africa from a 7 million-year-old jawbone that was found there. And I do believe these things are getting looked at. I will say that scientists, I don't take it personally anymore. They're vicious to each other. It's like a high school clique. It's like so many people really, instead of saying, okay, we need more science, but I'm open to your theory, I'll entertain it. I'll give you my input. Let's be buddies. There's a lot of like backstab and really difficult things that happen, But I do think that, like right now, there is a comet research team that Graham Hancock works with, and there's like 55 scientists, 60 scientists from all around the world that are working on this idea of the Younger Dryas impact theory. I met with Al Goodyear at the University of South Carolina and interviewed him. I've met many of these scientists. They're going to Greenland to try to do the same tests again that showed high levels of platinum at the 12,800 year horizon, right? So they're going to go and take 200 gallons of water this month in June, bring it back to the lab, and test the Harvard's team test to see indeed if we're dealing with not just a single contamination, but an extraterrestrial impact 12,800 years ago. So there is science to be done around these ideas of bringing myth and legend to life. And, I do feel like scientists are more open to that. It's just some people have to take that courageous step and open it. And I think people with alternative minds cannot make an enemy of the other side. Understand the scientific mind. You have to be the other. And then you have to coerce a meeting in the middle where you can both agree on the scientific standard that must be met, maybe agree to disagree on certain matters, but just work together with a sense of camaraderie. And we try to do that in all our shows. I try not to run my mouth. We work together with different archaeological teams. We don't all agree, but I try to get people who love what they do, get them involved, hear their opinions, and solve problems together. Not demonize one side of the argument. Then it's right. That's like politics or religion. How far have we gotten there? It's left, it's right, it's this, it's that. It's like we all agree on certain things. Let's start there. Let's agree that we all want certain things. We all want certain things for our family. We all want to treat people a certain way or be treated a certain way. And then let's go off from there. And let's tackle these problems from a base of commonality, not from difference. And, because science needs spirit. That's what it needs. And that's why the scientists of old, the shamans and the wizards of old, were portrayed as these magicians, the magicians of the gods, these incredible beings, because they blended the scientific with the spiritual, and they alchemically created something extraordinary, and they bent the laws of time and space in ways we can't understand. And our cold, hard, left-brain Cartesian science keeps going at it in a really materialistic way. So it still doesn't understand the mysteries of levitation and all these other things yet, because it's focused on the material aspect. It has not blended spirituality with it. And hopefully that is coming, because we need a rescue pretty soon.
What are some of the more fascinating discoveries that you've come across that you haven't already mentioned today?
Some of the, just from an archaeological standpoint, I found a lot of evidence for stonework being of Native American origin all around the country, in old records and documents and paintings and pictures and site visits, from West Virginia or out west to New England. I believe, I've amassed a pretty good catalog of Native American stonework, a lot of it that has never been cited before or known about before. And I'm proud of all that work. And I feel a lot of people in this country, they want to connect to spirituality and they want to connect to the land. In our heritage in this country, it's a native heritage. It's like the Druids in England. And a lot of people look to Native American wisdom and ceremonies and teachings and traditions. So I think a lot of people want to, go out to mound sites or go to ancient native ceremonial sites that were built with certain geometric principles and ways that connect to the land, to basically be tools of enlightenment, to help them in their spiritual journey. So I encounter a lot of people like that. And, I'm thankful to be a part of the research of those matters. Actually, our last two shows, have been about the lost colony of Roanoke, finding out what happened to the lost colony and analyzing this dare stone. We did two 2-hour documentaries the last 2 years. And with it, we've had a lot of real finds in real time, which is interesting because you do a show, you get your research together, you get the film crew together, you don't know what you're going to find. And frankly, 9 times out of 10, you're not really going to find anything because archaeology is slow and meticulous. But we've been blessed. At the end of our first show, we found a massive Native American settlement that has never been found before. Football fields large that went to the water, into the Chowan River. You can dive in there and bring up thousands of artifacts in your hands. It's really an amazing sight. And that was the site where the strange dare stone was found in 1937 that is written in Elizabethan English that purports to tell the tale of the lost colony. So we just did another 2-hour special that aired in March. And at the end of it, we believe we found these lost copper mines that have been out of sight for 500 years, where the colonists went and were enslaved, 7 that survived a massacre to beat copper. So, and then we did analysis of the dare stone. We cut it. And we found that it came from this copper belt where these mines are. So right now, the university we're working with is trying to verify if these are Native American or not. And if they're Native American, that's like a Nat Geo kind of incredible find that will probably make its magazine. These lost mines of Ritno that the early colonists were looking for in 1586 that have been found after 500 years that could hold the key to the fate of the lost colony. So in real time, we found some pretty amazing things. And all these kind of sub-finds of a lesser order have also been found in our shows through our analysis using different technologies. So we have been blessed. And, you know, we did a show, Search for the Lost Giants 2, where we found a lot of photographic evidence of 8-foot-tall skeletons and a lot of really, pretty astounding records, you know. The problem with that and the problem with that investigation is that, which I understand, it's illegal to dig up Native American remains, and which I fully understand. You can only imagine, you know, going into a cemetery and you're starting to dig in there like, oh, I think there's a giant in here, you know, that people wouldn't take too well to that, you know. So as a matter of respect towards Native people, you know, obviously that isn't taking place. I would think and hope that, you know, we'll have a find in like some South Pacific island or something. I think the story of giants will be verified. I think there's something strange to the way we collectively obfuscate the truth from ourselves. And I believe reality is holistic, you know? So it sounds odd, but I just really think it doesn't have to be a vast conspiracy. I think it's that we are a species with amnesia. We have suffered PTSD. We have this connection with the past, this kind of wonderful utopian mythological connection to a better time. But something happened, you know, a cometary impact quite possibly. Something stunted us as a species, and we are loath to go back to this place and deal with the trauma of it. So we kind of like, you know, like gradualists in geology, they love that everything takes millions of years. You know, nobody wants to get into this idea. It's like it hurts the psyche to comprehend catastrophism or rapid change. I think that is changing in its own right, and people are more open to these ideas. But it's always been based around ideas of gradual change and basically we know all there is to know about the past. I think that is changing. And, you know, I hope it changes more rapidly because there is a lot of wisdom that is out there about the past, and ancient people have a lot to tell us. And we're just oftentimes turning our back on it, you know, for science that isn't oriented towards spirit. That's science that only serves and solves part of the problem. You know, I think there's a deeper alchemical reality that can be accessed here, you know.
So based on what you're saying today and from other guests I've had on the show and my own research, it seems like there have been many cycles that have occurred on Earth throughout millennia, and that prior to 12,000 years ago was an age of higher consciousness, and even much farther than that was a golden age. And a lot of these many ancient structures, such as the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, were built in these previous cycles of higher consciousness. And that seems to sort of also relate to a time when there were gods living among men and people who lived to 1,000 years old and so on. Do you believe that the Earth might have been somehow different in terms of geologically different, or maybe vibrationally different in that time, that enabled people to live for such long years and possess a higher consciousness and maybe even of a taller stature?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know some Japanese scientists did some different experiments to that end to talk about like a higher oxygen-rich atmosphere having certain effects on species growing taller or being more long-lived. And there are theories about that. If you get into the electric universe theories of David Talbot and Immanuel Velikovsky, Worlds in Collision, you will start to understand that there's quite possibly a different reality in the past where Saturn and Mars were aligned differently in the sky, and there was a cosmic impact. And it's interesting, where did the asteroid belt come from? Was there another planet there? Like they talk about Marduk. Was there something different in the sky that is captured in the symbolism that is remarkably similar across cultures all around the world? David Talbot would say yes. And if you watch his Symbols in an Alien Sky, I think you would see what a compelling case he makes of Saturn and the day that Saturn turned on the human race. And it's like the god Saturn, was always part of a golden age, and something bad happened, basically. Why do the ancient people fear the broom star, right? When we see a comet, we say, wow, that's astonishing. A comet is incredible. But is it because of like the Tauriid media stream that keeps coming back? And these people weren't, that's one thing we can agree upon. Ancient people were not stupid. They were amazingly clever, amazingly ingenuitive, adaptive, and they understood what was going on in the night sky, that's for sure. So they recorded all these celestial events and supernovas and things like that. So, I would say yes to the idea that something happened that really caused a lot of haywire activity. And like Velikovsky could be right. It rings true to me. And it rings true, like Vine Deloria, the great Native American scholar, he was actually friends with Velikovsky. And they agreed. The oral traditions of the native people agreed with a lot of Velikovsky's findings, And, you have to look at your intuition around these things. Like I said, why fear the comet? It's this interesting astronomical phenomena, but there's a reason to. And I do agree with you that, like Edgar Cayce would say, from 12,000 years ago to 200,000 years ago, there was a golden age. There was a golden continent. Some might say Lemuria in the Pacific also. You have this enlightened place that went down 12,000 years ago. But they coexisted with Solutrean people, with hunter-gatherers. So just like today, we coexist with native people in the Amazon who don't even know we exist. That's what was happening. See, the anthropologists will say, well, no, we know that hunter-gatherers, they were in the Lasso Cave. We know that what the Solutreans were doing in Ice Age Europe. But we also know in the Atlantic, where Atlantis was supposed to be, it was a quite temperate climate. And as Plato talked about, that this area, 9600 BC, he pinpoints, basically that's the date of Göbekli Tepe, the repromulgation of society, the reinvention of agriculture, the place where man bags show up, and the most vast megalithic site on the planet was built, 50 times greater than Stonehenge, then buried after 1,000 years. It's like so astonishing, makes your head spin. You have that occurring at this time. Now, I would offer that there is evidence that in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, out in the Azores, the Canaries, somewhere out there, that there could have been the continent of Atlantis that sunk, that it's not in the Antarctic, it's not in Bolivia, it was where Edgar Cayce said it was. It is where Plato said it was. And that's the thing. You look at oceanography and geology, you really got to take a dive into these matters and make a case that, yes, this could have existed. There were new continents that are being found. Zealand, off the coast of New Zealand, off the coast of India, these ancient continents that were submerged long, long ago. It's becoming more of a probability that there was a massive shift and that the sea levels rose, not gradually, but overnight, like 400 or 500 feet in some areas. That catastrophic activity took place 12,800 years ago. So science is catching up to mythology now, and it's being verified.
There's a lot of discussion these days about Antarctica and what is there. Are you aware of any of the research taking place?
I am. Some of what I've seen is I see pyramid-like form, but geologically I don't see a pyramid. I see, what strikes me as a natural formation. Corey Good, David Wilcock. I've heard some of this stuff, and I'm interested. I'm like, hey, I'm the first guy who's going to be open. I will say you need, verifiable science here. There seems to be some structures that might come to light. If there was something that is verifiable, if there was an ancient site, if there's ancient stonework or whatever, I'm the first one there, to go and investigate it. I need some impetus to get there, but I am open to the idea. I would have to say I need more evidence at this point. I'm open to it, but I haven't seen incontrovertible proof. And I like the Bosnian pyramid idea. I admire the effort. And it's very intriguing. For me, I have to see more archaeological evidence. And people might be like, one thing that happened was, especially getting to this whole giant controversy, is that I became entrenched in a way of thinking like, oh, it's on me to prove this case rather than not solve a mystery, right? So I became like a defender of the position rather than just somebody who's like, yeah, let's figure this out. Well, why are there myths and legends of giants? Why are there these giant accounts everywhere? Why are they interwoven in human history? What does it mean, And come from a more objective, agendaless position. So I learned what it's like to be entrenched and basically hostile to another opinion, because I caught tons of heat. I caught all these weird, like being called a racist and being called, a lunatic. And it's just like, no, I'm just like an investigator. And I didn't even make a theory up. It's like, wow, isn't this interesting? I like sharing this information, right? Like, isn't it interesting that in all these documents, these town and county histories that are unsensationalized, obscurely buried in them, they're talking about giants with like double rows of teeth all around the country in an era of inefficient communication. And any logical person would say, yes, that's interesting. That doesn't mean giants roamed the earth, but that's definitely worth investigating, right? So I've learned to position myself where I'm going to hear both sides of an argument and not be entrenched anymore and not be beholden to one way of thinking. Because agenda makes you stupid, quite honestly. It's like, I'm the true believer. I'm going to engage in cognitive dissonance. And I'm not going to look at things logically and objectively because I don't like the system. I don't like the way, things are run, our dehumanizing system. I want to lump in science with a system that basically doesn't respect humans or the earth or whatever. Or I'm going to be a pseudo-skeptic, or I'm just going to be a skeptic, and I'm going to cherry pick these easy targets, where people believe things without evidence, and I'm going to feel superior. And my brain doesn't make enough dopamine, so I'm going to like denigrate people, So on both sides, you have error, and you meet in the middle, and you discuss these things logically. But don't be afraid to talk about the supernatural or the bizarre either. There's a reason, there's millions of people believe we're visited by alien life. There are strong cases for that. My brother was in the Air Force for 20 years. He worked on the big board in Offutt Air Force Base. I know many people in the military. Like I said, my dad was in World War II in Berlin. I know pilots. I know Air Force guys. I know, I've read through lots of redacted documents. This isn't like some kooky new age thing, the idea of extraterrestrial life. Something's going on here. I think, in fact, it was just somebody on 60 Minutes, like a billionaire who was talking about that. It was an engineer or something like that. But not to get tangential, but, there are credible people, police officers seeing things, over counties, in Illinois and different places. Something's going on. And let's stop pretending that these credible people are crazy. There's something going on. And to push that aside, not to entertain it, Like, I don't know about the Bigfoot phenomenon either, but people are seeing something. It's so strange because Native Americans had like 200 different names and theories and oral traditions about Bigfoot. And then the white settlers started to see them. Then in Australia, they're seeing them for thousands of years. Then you have the Yeti. It's something. I don't know if it's like a multi-dimensional thing. Like, you could say, oh, they have to have a breeding population. And the anthropologist could say that, and I agree. Or, but maybe there's another component to it. What you can't discount is something's going on, and they're seeing something. That's where I'm coming from. It's like, I'm not the guy to tell people they're crazy. When they are seeing something and experiencing something, it's like, okay, let's try to figure it out.
What should we make of all, and I'm sure you've seen, and a lot of our viewers have seen, the many YouTube videos of supposed discoveries of giant skeletons, which are primarily just Photoshop pictures. Are any of those valid, or are they all just made up?
I think essentially all part of an early 2000, I think it was like a Worth Point 2000 or 6000 contest to Photoshop giant skeletons. And that's part of the problem, is like, we addressed that in the first chapter of our book, Giants on Record. Hugh Newman and I wrote that. And we addressed that. And there was another story. It's funny, it came out after our show about the Smithsonian admitting to the destruction of thousands of skeletons. Now, it was from like World Daily News. It was from a fake website. And I got hundreds of people saying, oh, check this out, check this out. And my immediate response was, if this were true, it would be national news. It wouldn't be picked up by one obscure, website. Like, you can't have an over willingness to believe override logic and reason. I'd love, for something like that to be true, or this picture of a 10-foot skeleton to be a reality. I actually have some pictures that I believe are, of 8 and 9 foot, giants. And well, when you get into those Photoshop pictures, to me, it indicates, I don't know if they're purposely planted or circulated to like push this whole idea aside, maybe. What I will say though, is it really triggers that will to believe in people, that they have to check that. I understand that, there is a mythological romance about a lost world, because look at our world. We're not doing a really good job as humans. People want to have a different existence, and that will be faulted against. The skeptic will fault somebody who's more open-minded, like you're just like a weak-minded romanticist because you're believing in some lost world like the Lord of the Rings. And it's like, I disagree with that. We all want or many of us want a better world that's more benevolent and like embraces nature. And like me, I spend all my time rebuilding stone walls all around town, or building 12-foot stone towers in the woods so the unicorns come back. Like I have this mythology about working with nature and creating supernatural environments. So you have basically this thrust in people to want to believe in a lost world, if you will. And I really feel like that's a good impulse, but you also have to check that with the will to believe, because that's why I keep myself out of the fray. There's no monetary, there is no, I'm beholden to no one doing what I do. When I research, I just research. I'll tell things that people don't want to hear. I'll agree with people that are alternative minded. I try to stay out of it so I can offer an objective viewpoint to people. And I admit when I'm wrong, and I admit the errors that I make so other people maybe can learn from those also. Because there's nothing more refreshing than like, oh, I used to believe that. I saw the evidence and I just relinquished that thought and I'm liberated. It's when you start thinking you know it all, you get in trouble. So there's nothing wrong with investigating these things. And I always encourage people to look into, they'll send me a report and I'm like, go to the local library, look at the land records, go to the museum. I try to encourage them to do the research and figure out what they can, And oftentimes they come back and it's like, wow, I found something remarkable. And, to me, I hear what you're saying about all those phony reports, I think the truth lies in the middle, but that doesn't mean the truth is stale and bland. I think the truth is like outrageous, but the truth lies in the middle where science can comprehend it, analyze it, measure it. But at the same time, there is this incredible supernatural element to it at the same time. And, all the questions are worth asking, but that middle ground is really the place of truth, I believe. And I'll lastly say it's the middle ground that includes everything. That because somebody thinks different than you, they're not excluded. They may be in a diminished state of being, but what they are in reality is something much larger. And that's the holographic nature of everything. It's like, I could like point my finger at Donald Trump and like, you're screwing this up, you're doing that. Or I could say, that I am being a hypocrite if I don't look at myself in this lifetime or other lifetimes, all the strange and manipulative things I've done because out of fear of money or survival or being overstimulated by biology. We're in the body of like a creature here on Earth, so we are subject to coercion through biology and survival. And we've all done strange things. So I'm not going to throw stones at someone else. I'm going to like offer them hope that they can wake up and, open their heart or something, have a different take on life. And when you get in that judgmental orientation, you basically, as the Buddhists would say, to judge another is to drink poison and wait for someone else to die. It's really like that. You're not understanding that you're condemning yourself, And we're all playing this game of, oh, you're not me, Oh, the professional isn't me. Oh, that fringe believer, he isn't me. That Republican and Democrat, they're not me. It's like, no, it's all part of the same. That's the toughest thing to grasp, but that's where the truth lies too.
You mentioned the Rosicrucians earlier. Is there any connection between the Rosicrucians and Freemasons and the Knights Templars and these ancient civilizations that you're aware of?
Yes, absolutely. Just like Plato's teachings, just like oral traditions, religious documents, Casey, Steiner, and Blavatsky, they all say the same thing. The Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, in our book, there's a chapter about the mystics in the secret societies and giants. I have reports from the 1930s about a 8-foot skeleton found in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, that was shipped to the University of Pittsburgh and then went on to the Smithsonian. And it says Rosicrucian science confirmed. So the Rosicrucians and Freemasons are basically saying the same thing, that giants existed, that Atlantis is the origin of esoteric wisdom, and their wisdom travels all the way back through time, through their temple priests of Sais, all the way back to the Atlantean temple masters who were benevolently oriented. They also say that little people and giants were part of the civilization of Atlantis, that there was a supernatural founding to Homo sapiens, that the androgynous creator gods were long-lived beings, just like the Bible says. So they line up with all these strange, seemingly disconnected realities. Androgynous, long-lived creator beings who birthed the human race, got trapped in the material world, and part of that was a population of Atlantis who had little people and giants. And it seems like, whoa, but Plato says all those same things, and like all the other sources like the Bible, it's just astonishing. So the Rosicrucians and Freemasons are saying that. And people tend to, and I'm always pushing my producers when we're making a show, I'm like, let's get into the esoteric angles, because people understand that there's something going on here. Even the Knights Templar, Baphomet, when you see Baphomet, you're struck at it like that's like a satanic god. No, it's showing the balance of nature, and it's an androgynous being, which is, once again, astounding. And the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, they basically believe that androgynous beings birthed the human race 200,000 years ago. Just like Edgar Cayce, just like Steiner, just like Plato, just like all these oral traditions. Even the Australian Aboriginals have a god that is an androgynous creator god, their master god. So these isolated Aboriginal people in Australia for 50,000 years, at least they've been there. You look at their cave painting, they have this androgynous creator god. Like, where does that come from? Just like 6 fingers and 6 toes and man bags and swastikas that you see all around the planet. There's another story here, and people know it. I don't have to push too hard to get people to admit there's something going on. I might not have all the answers. I'm not even putting forth a theory other than a comparative analysis of all these different sources that are usually, well received and trusted. People can argue about the Bible, but you get into Plato, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, they're all saying the same thing, and it's quite a bizarre story. And then they're also talking about the Great Flood, and a massive catastrophic event. So, they're all pinpointing the same data about 13,000 years ago too. So for me to say that's not worth investigation, I'd be out of my mind. I'd be much more comfortable, I think, like at a colonial site, digging with an archaeological team in one way, because I'd be more respected and I could use my scientific mind, but I just can't do that. I am compelled and pulled in this direction by my intuition. And how can you turn your back on your intuition if you're an investigator? It's the biggest crime there is, So I'm not saying, everything I'm saying is true. I'm saying, all these things have my intuition go off. All the bells go off. I'll share my experience with that.
Now, a lot of these giants were buried in certain postures and facing east, were they not?
Yes, that's a good point.
Do you think there's any significance to that and some of the Freemasonic and Knights Templar and Rosicrucian rituals of direction?
Absolutely. It's interesting because that's another kind of proof that we're dealing with a real phenomenon here. A lot of these, even in the Smithsonian ethnology reports, so this is what you have around in this country, in the United States, all around the country: Smithsonian ethnology reports, archaeological, anthropological bulletins, town and county histories, newspaper accounts, on and on and on, diary entries. They're all saying that these human burials with Native American grave goods were often buried, with specific anatomic anomalies, but they were buried in like seating postures facing the east, or like spokes of a wheel, right? So you have a Native American burial of like an 8-foot tall, giant down in Deerfield, Mass, where I live. The head is as big as a peck basket, and he's buried in a seated position facing the east. Now, Greg Little and Andrew Collins wrote a book, The Path of Souls, Andrew would be someone, I mean, I'm sorry, well, both of them, but Greg, he has Native American ancestry and he's done a lot of research. And he talks about the journey of the soul and the importance of the East. And it's not just Native Americans, people all around the planet. 10 years ago in Egypt, Zawi Hawass, I think, was part of the dig. They found a 33,000-year-old skeleton that was buried in a sitting posture facing the east. You know, I found it remarkable that at least 30,000 years old, this obscure burial technique goes back. And oftentimes giant skeletons, you know, are described in these burials. Sometimes normal skeletons, like the one in Egypt was normal-sized woman. But there is something to do with the idea of what happens to the soul, the nature of the soul, the mystics and the secret societies, the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons. All these sources are basically playing with the same playbook. They're reading off the same playbook. They agree remarkably in like 90% of the knowledge they share. There are some variations, like the Bible might have their dates off on the Great Flood, and they might not mention this, but they pretty much are mentioning giants and little people and all these specific things. But what you said about burial techniques is actually a very good point. It's like from the Aleutian Islands to Massachusetts, once again, these aren't mastodon bones and hoaxes. These are real burials that have taken place where the dude in the middle is listed at like 7.5 or 8 feet tall, and the rest of the skeletons are normal sized, right? Well, this guy's an elongated skull. He's 8'6", and he's buried in a seating posture facing the east with grave goods that we know to be of a Native American origin that some town historian isn't going to lie about or figure out or create a bizarre hoax, you know? So it adds further veracity to these accounts that we're talking about.
So and I'm not sure if you can answer this question, but since you've researched so many different ancient civilizations, as well as you're involved in your own metaphysical research and studied a lot of ancient texts, if you were to look at the different kinds of teachings that were left behind by these ancient races that were of a giant or taller nature, is there a consistent kind of teaching or message that they left behind across all these different areas?
Yeah, I would say it is about the nature of the soul, about what, you know, you hear renting a body, hopefully 70 or 80 years. I tend to believe in reincarnation. All the ancient texts do. It would be a belief in incarnation. It would be an understanding of basically this world is not our home, that we're having kind of a hallucination, if you will, that the world of time and space is basically like a strange experiment, if you will, that the soul, that larger connected part that we tap into sometimes is the real us, whether through meditation, whatever. It's changeless, it's ceaseless, it is not affected by time and space. But we are in a body experiencing this, and we can be coerced by the body to misperceive. So a lot of the teachings that have to do with, it's not just, it's specific to a lost world, if you will, to a people, to a species, to a race that had giant people as part of them. These temple priests and wisdom keepers were all purported to be of giant stature. So I'm not going to say they're different from humans, but they probably had a larger level of connection, like their third eye was open. They had this level of connection that we tried to get to through plant medicine ceremonies or intense like metaphysical practice like meditation. But I think the message is like, what are you? What are we in reality? You know, how do you enact these mystery teachings, these initiations to bring out the larger you, to understand? So you don't just like, you know, run out the clock, come back again for another incarnation, not understanding. That's where the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons and the mystics come in, like Edgar Cayce. Like, it is up to you. You cannot vicariously receive that higher knowing. You have to do it yourself. You have to choose. And if some force could vicariously come in and give you your enlightenment, it would diminish your ability to do it. You know, so it can't literally exist. So what I would say, you know, the question you asked is that what is this higher wisdom that has consistently been passed down? It's about the use of sacred geometry and mathematics and the creation of ancient megalithic sites around the planet that are tools of enlightenment that you go to visit with a level of connection that opens you up, that allows you to download. Like I'll visit all these ancient sites and I'll keep like downloading more wisdom, but more of a connection to the divine, to the larger, which sounds odd, but I think a lot of people experience the same thing. I would think Hugh Newman, Brian Forrester, Andrew Collins, Graham Hancock would say something similar. And, they are built in a particular way, not by accident. They are built as tools of enlightenment, even the Mound Centers in the U.S. And you visit like with an open mind and heart, and something shifts inside you. And I think the ancient wisdom is using all these phenomena of space and time to assist the initiate to wake up, because that's all there is to wake up to is reality. It's not like Jim Vieira is going to be eating ice cream with some guy in a throne, for eternity. It's like we misperceive what reality is. Reality is not a body. Reality is an energetic state of like bliss, if you will, that we're having a prodigal son nightmare, if you will, sleeping from that reality. And then when we return, the mystics and the shaman would say there is a blessing in the forgetfulness of what we're experiencing now, where everybody we love appears to die eventually and people suffer, and it's not the utopian society we would want. But our greater reality outside of time and space that we will awaken to when we become enlightened is incredibly, benevolent and ceaseless and, filled with connection, And that's the message I keep seeing. I see it in all these esoteric things. Like people say, oh, the Rosicrucians are up to no good, and there's all this weird stuff with Freemasonry. And, I'm sure there's figures who came in and out of these disciplines that were not, fully enlightened. But no, the disciplines, they're all saying the same thing. And the mystics, like when you read Edgar Cayce, he's just asking, follow the law of one. Follow treat everyone like you would want to be treated. Orient yourself for the good of all. And that's what I do. There's a lot of this like new age philosophy about I want more money or success. It's like, it does nothing for me. It's like, I want to orient to the good of all. I want money, you need money to a certain extent, but I live in a small place with Linus the cat. I like cut my bills. I really just try to live a life in service to what I love to do. It could be just doing walls everywhere and brightening people's day when they drive on my street. They see miles of like Viking walls that I brought back to life with my brother. I just feel compelled to live a life like that. Not to cast judgment on anybody, but the message that's being sent here is, orient your life to the good of all and to the law of one, that we're all one. And don't be in judgment of others, as tough as that is sometimes, because you ultimately, if you just view it selfishly, you're condemning yourself. You want to be open-minded and compassionate towards everybody's plight.
If you believe that these ancient races that were somehow physiologically more advanced, it gave them the ability to tap into their higher abilities more readily, but we don't possess that same ability today. Do you think that by use of these different tools you just mentioned, such as going to the ancient sites or ayahuasca or whatnot, or meditation maybe even, that we can still access that same level of connection, or is that just out of our reach for now?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. No, absolutely. Absolutely you can. And I see a spiritual teacher that is enlightened, and that's tough I've been all around the planet. I've had a lot of spiritual teachers. I've seen for the last 15 years weekly, my spiritual teacher, he's half an hour away. My brother and I have seen him, and he's an enlightened master, no question about it. And what I've experienced personally, and I've dealt with shamans, I've dealt with wisdom keepers, and I know that enlightenment is possible in this lifetime. The trick is, though, it takes several decades that you have to, there are no shortcuts. See, ayahuasca can reveal to you your true state, which is great. But you go back, I'm back home from Ecuador. It's like, oh, wait, I got to go back there to go achieve that state again, that state of like blissful connection, that incredible level of clear discernment. I have to go, no, you don't go back there. What you got to do is you got to clean up all your misperceptions. You got to take personal responsibility. You got to look at the nitty gritty of your life. It's like, do I love that person, or is it just biological overstimulation? Why do I care about that person more than I care about you? It's kind of like the false love that we have. It really, you got to sober up to the reality of coercion in the body, and how you can misperceive beauty for goodness and all these weird things, or survival. Like, there's only so much out there, so I gotta battle you to get, instead of like, let's work together to create abundance. But the point is that I do believe those states are accessible. I've experienced them, and I continue to more and more. But it's a function of a lot of work for a lot of time, and that's like having compassion, having discernment, taking responsibility, kind of cleaning up your misperceptions, and actively meditating, like to connect to that state. That energetic you is always there. It's a choice, though, right? So like right now, I can connect and I can feel that current, or I can be out in the future or the past. As my spiritual teacher would say, there is self-stimulation and there is life stimulators. He would say, like, if you spend all day on Facebook or something like that, you're self-stimulating, like, ooh, maybe people like my post, or, oh, this person, sent me a message, and my brain lights up with dopamine, rather than I'm going to go out in the woods and build a stone arch bridge, and that's where I'm going to spend all my time. And I'm going to spend just a little time on social media. I'm going to stimulate my life with higher purpose connection to that energetic state. Well, obviously you, and the skills you have at doing your job, you're connected to your life stimulation by virtue of what you're doing, with all your great questions and your presence and your skills. So it's like you're carrying out that. And many people like, I don't even know what I got to work my job. I don't have the time or effort. Or it's like, if you're good at the piano, don't play for 18 minutes a month. Play and play and play. And then at some point you'll be in the orchestra. But you just can't, you got to pour your love into it. And for me, it's like stonework. I'm going to just pour my heart and soul into it, and it'll become my profession. Research, I'm going to pour my heart and soul. I did years of research, get paid for nothing. My book, it's like 10 cents an hour. I'm probably getting paid, and that's fine. But now it's come to the point where I can get in this groove. So for me, it sounds a little weird, but like going out to a bar on Saturday night is a self-stimulating activity. It's like, that doesn't serve me. It serves me to like do what I love, to like have a big bonfire or build a 20-foot stone tower out in the woods or something like that. That's the kind of stuff. So all the things you pointed out to, it can be ceremonies, it can be meditation, it can be yoga. That state is available. And I would also say this, there's a guy, Muji. He's a spiritual master in Portugal, and he has a bunch of videos, Mooji. He's a Jamaican guy who lived in England, and now he lives in Portugal. He's just a beautiful being. And listen to what he has to say about love and relationships. He has these great satsangs where he sits for hours and talks. And if you have an interest in enlightenment, that guy really, and he gave a talk on ayahuasca, actually, and he said, it's great, it can reveal something larger to you, but it doesn't last. It's like you have to make that choice to actively connect to the larger. And the more you do it, the critical mass will shift, and you will become an awakened being at some point. But by virtue of your own choosing, no guru is going to touch you on the shoulder. He may assist you and may support you, but you got to make that internal choice yourself. And that's all these things. I went to Stonehenge. I was kind of bored. I went to Glastonbury tour. I was like talking to King Arthur. I saw like multiple lines of realities and lifetimes, and I'm a pretty dense dude, So it's like, you don't know what these places are built for and what's going to speak to you. And I went to Aramu, the portal in Peru, and I was lit up. And I went to different places, and they didn't really do it for me, So something's going on, and at the end of the day, it's like, this is a reality, and it's your choice to connect to it. And I would say my teacher would teach like to sit into eye gaze with someone you love. Just sit by for like 10 minutes and eye gaze, and you will feel that larger energetic state. He would call it the flow of love and care that we are. So I do that. I sit with him, my brother and I, every morning. We talk like this for an hour. We sit down, we practice the flow, like 30, 40 minutes, then we're off to work. Then we get back, and sometimes we do it again. And it's just that, like, the silent connection, and you could feel it just run through you. It's like, that's a reality. That's the me that is real, not the Jim Vieira, whatever. I'm good at this, I'm lame at that. I'm going to die someday. It's that energetic state of love and care is what you are. And I apologize for the long-winded nature of it, but I really, if there's something important that I can convey to people, it's like, do that. You could do it in the mirror, do it with someone you care about, and they just did a study that came out about it has the same effects of LSD. actually, in the way it like breaks up your stuck patterns of thought. Practicing eye gazing. I know the natives did it too. And it's like that's a really important tool in the toolkit, because the goal is to become enlightened. You don't want to come back again. Like if I got hit by a truck today after this interview, I would be born to parents of a more enlightened state. Not to talk my game up, but I've been spending about 35 years of like self-reflection and getting rid of violations and really making the effort, to connect with something larger. So it is a process, and it takes lifetime sometimes. So I encourage anyone to pour your heart and soul into this. Not only does it have that effect, it makes your life so much better. You don't fight with anyone. You can be the other. You can see their point of view. You can have compassion when somebody is stuck. You see everybody, like this guy's in first grade, this guy's a master, this guy's in the middle. Everybody's at different stages. Don't condemn anyone. You were there one time. You did terrible things in other lifetimes because you misperceived, or I'm just speaking for myself. Be open to that and be forgiving of it. So thanks for letting me run on there.
You mentioned that a lot of these ancient gods and goddesses and beings that were giants were depicted as being androgynous. Now, a lot of ancient teachings and even Buddhist philosophy and Chinese philosophy and even mainstream teachers in the United States, such as the author of Think and Grow Rich, they all wrote about or spoke about the necessity of preserving sexual energy. And there's also a bit of a taboo that exists in religion relating to sex. Now, do you believe that these ancient beings were truly androgynous, or is this some sort of a message that we're to convey, or they're trying to convey to us?
I think they were literally androgynous, and I'll throw it back to you right now that your questions are like mind reading. It's so funny. It's like it shows like your level of skill around these topics. That yes, I believe they were literally androgynous. I think it was like a supernatural thing. That's what Edgar Cayce would say. But the more they got trapped, the more they created things and life forms. They got trapped in their interactions. Their lifespans were reduced. Right? This isn't just in the Bible. This is like the list of kings in Vietnam from thousands of years ago. They list the kings and how long they lived. It's just remarkable. But the more we become trapped in matter, the shorter our lifespan became. And I studied the Taoist practice of not ejaculating for decades, myself. It's not easy. But that energy you can use as enlightenment. And the idea is that sexual union should be not used the way it is in the West as like this just totally gratifying activity. It's more of a loving activity to use that energy to connect to something larger. And the androgynous, that's why it's like, oh, I want to be with another being. You feel like this heartache sometimes because, as Plato would say, it's like Zeus split us in half and now you have male and female, and we were once androgynous and self-contained. So you have to bring that back to life. And one good way of getting that connection of being both male and female is through sexual union that the female doesn't really deal with that as much as the male. Because the male will, frankly, lose interest because it's such like ejaculation, such a taxing activity. It uses cerebral spinal fluid. It's just like, women are like, what is wrong with you? Where'd you go? You just like want to eat a sub or something. It's like, no, it's a physiological thing. So if you are in union with someone and you have that energy flowing correctly, it can get you to these highest states of consciousness. I do believe we are talking about androgynous beings. That doesn't mean we have to become androgynous. It means part of enlightenment, though, is the cultivation of sexual energy. I really think it's an important thing. It doesn't have to, it's not an either or. It can be part of it. I think it's a potent part of the awakening process in understanding the male and female aspect that we both embody. That it's the yin and the yang. The female has both, and we have both. It's just it is representative stronger as us as men. But there is something to it, and it's a really good question around sexuality. And one thing I also found is like I've had like my ex-wife, I was with her for like 15 years, we're still very close, and I love her to death. We have such a loving and close relationship. We just came to a point where it's like it wasn't a romantic partnership anymore, so we parted ways in that way. It was basically one of the only appropriate relationships I've had in my entire life, because you're often drawn to someone like because of biological overstimulation rather than, oh, wow, we have a lot in common. I'm going to present the authentic you right now. I'm sorry. I'm going to present the authentic me. I'm not going to play these weird games like who shall like me if I operate like this, or I look like that, or I pretend I have money. None of that garbage. Like when you really cut through it and you present your authentic self and you see the other for who they are and you realize, wow, we have a lot in common, and you cut through all that biological stuff. Not that attraction shouldn't be there. I think that's important. So I'm really finding myself, my relationships have been confused and convoluted by biology instead of a real desire to be with someone who I'm on the same page with. And I think that has to do with, you want a partner who is on the same page with you, and especially around, sexual activity, somebody who can we're using this not to dissociate like a drug addict. We're using this to encourage each other and to expand to something larger, and whatever, male, female, whatever the relationship is the sexual energy can really catapult you to high states of consciousness.
Well, tell us about, now you've written a number of books. Tell us about the books you've written, what they're about, and where people can find out about those or where to buy them.
Sorry, sitting in the same position. I'm used to moving and grooving all day with stones. Giants on Record, you can get it on Amazon. Me and Hugh Newman wrote it together. Hugh was on our show, Search for the Lost Giants. Hugh's all over everything. He's a brilliant researcher. He's on Ancient Aliens for numerous seasons. Right now we're working on a second book about the giants of the British Isles, which is very interesting. I have roots. I'm half Irish, half Portuguese. So it really brought me to this ancestral understanding of myth and legend and oral traditions. So we're writing the story of all the legends, myths, and archaeological reports of giants found at Stonehenge, ancient sites all around England. It will be the giants of Stonehenge and the British Isles. That we haven't finished yet. That will come out in a couple months. But it's a really interesting thing because, once again, all these myths and legends, they talk about these ancient beings who came from a lost continent. And these, I'll say this, Viracocha, the foam of the sea, showed up. He's the guy, the bearded being, who shows up and repromulgates civilization all around, out of Lake Titicaca. So in his wake, you see the most astonishing megalithic sites on the planet. As a stonemason, it just blows my mind. You see the repromulgation of society, the civilization that came, the agriculture and everything. And then he's rocking the man bag and he's got a beard. And then over in Ireland, Kukulcane shows up from this lost world as a bringer of civilization, a master of high technology. And he's also called the foam of the sea, right? Just like Quetzalcoatl, who shows up, Viracocha, who shows up in Lake Titicaca. And what they're saying is he possessed this ancient technology, the foam of the sea, this technology, the ship showing up, or this watercraft showing up 12,000 years ago, which is kind of mind-blowing that they're both called the foam of the sea. And Kukulcane had 7 fingers and 7 toes to add to that whole, idea of giants with polydactylism, 6 fingers, 6 toes, 7 digits, just another really stunning similarity. So I know that's a long-winded way of saying that I'm working on this book, and Giants on Record is available. We also did 2 shows for the History Channel the last 2 years, Search for the Lost Colony and Search for the 7, about the Lost Colony, that just aired. They run them consecutively for 4 hours. That's another cool historical mystery. And now we just work with our producers. I wanted to do a show that brings mystery of science, that goes and takes an ancient stone site and tries to reproduce the stonework, or dives, in some ancient site to kind of prove if this 10,000-year-old city existed there. So I want to do the investigations that people want to see. And I mean, there's millions of videos and stuff of interviews and shows. And I just say, if you have an interest, the book is pretty cool. It's I can't tell you how much research we poured into that. So, Giants on Record by myself and Hugh Newman, I would recommend that. We got a page, Giants on Record, on Facebook. And if you want to shoot me a question or anything like that, I'm on Facebook too. And,
So the best way to get in touch with you is on Facebook, or do you have a website or somewhere else?
Yeah, I don't. I'm in the witness protection program of ancient mystery researchers. It's funny. I have no phone. I'm glad you didn't have to call today. I'm off the grid, but I'm on Facebook just to like interact with people who have questions or do conferences and interviews. So I like to have a presence out there. Yeah, feel free to shoot me a call or, I'll offer any opinions I have if they're helpful. And I feel compelled to just assist people and, maybe give my experience of the tough stuff I had to deal with in life. I had a traumatic brain injury. I was playing football. I had a seizures disorder for 20 years. I've had to overcome a lot, just to stabilize my neurochemistry and, just to share things with people. I like to think I'm just a regular guy that's relatable too. Like, you don't have to be some fake guru to connect to something larger. Not to diss a guru. I'm just saying you don't have to be like some unattainable ideal of a spiritual teacher. You can just be yourself through self-reflection, hard work, and compassion to get where you need to get, So I'm open to, share or to deal with anybody's problems or issues as best I can. And, I appreciate, you're doing what you're doing and you're great, steady mind and really dead on questions. Really a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Yeah. It's probably a little out of order, but I wasn't aware of your football injury. Now, I find a lot of times when people have experiences like that, it radically alters their path and their consciousness. How did your life change because of that?
I had a skull fracture. I didn't even know any of this. I was in 9th grade. I was a decathlete. My brother and I did the decathlon too. Our athletic careers continued, but I played football. I got a skull fracture and I got sent back in the game, and which is terrible. The brain is inflamed. So basically, what happened was that it manifested later as massive depression. I would start to get petit mal seizures, right? So as I went to sleep and as I woke up, I would get hundreds of seizures, and it was like my whole world was turned gray for weeks. I was so depressed. I couldn't move. I couldn't function, and I didn't know what it was. And then I got a couple of grand mal seizures, which were terrible. I had my wife at the time and my son witnessed them, 10 minutes of convulsing. We didn't even know what they were. And what it did was it got me on a path of figuring out what's going on. What is my larger self? But when you deal with gripping depression, you are not what's the word I'm looking for? Seduced by the world. You look at things for what they are. You don't care about money and fame, and you care about feeling good. You care about just figuring this out and just being grateful for just normalcy, So in some way, I don't even know, I'm kind of like the Rain Man too. I can't tell you how much information my brain can hold. And I wonder, and I don't even know if I had this recall ability before the brain injury, but I feel like a mutant somehow, because the most obscure, I'm going to forget to give CPR to someone someday because my brain is filled with so much information. But I really feel like it changed me, neurologically, physiologically, and spiritually, having this brain injury. There's no question about it, And hopefully it encourages other people, don't get down. I don't get any more seizures for 15 years. I don't take any medication either. I don't even get auras. And I work out hard. You know what I mean? So through self-reflection and through dealing with a lot of things and just self-honesty, I basically mitigated these symptoms. I actually should go to my neurologist. I'm probably a medical freak because you're not supposed to alleviate these things on your own, And I could tell you, I don't take Depakote anymore. I never get seizures anymore. And it's great to come out the other way, And there are unavoidable things in life, right? It's like quicksand. They're going to happen. You can't avoid them. And that injury was like that. There's been times in my life where it's just this is a life lesson. Take it for what it is. Don't try to push it away.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that story. I think that's very fascinating. A lot of people, I think, go through hardships in their life, and it's easy to look at them as a negative experience, but I find oftentimes there's a seed of very positive growth in everything.
Totally. I'll quickly say, my ex, Kimmy, she had horrendous ulcerative colitis for years. I was basically brought her home to die from the hospital. And because she was so weak, she couldn't survive the colon surgery. And then I found it was a snowstorm, and a naturopath contacted me like the day I'm like crying and crying, like it's like I'm basically preparing for a funeral. And we went out in a blizzard and we met with this guy who's on the run from the FBI, and he hooks her up to this electromedical device. And then she starts to feel better. And then he gives this protocol, like started growing wheatgrass, and she would drink 8 ounces of wheatgrass and do implants also in her intestines. And she had all these poisons that happened when she was a kid. So basically she rebuilt her immune system, came back to life. And I'm doing a stone job at her house. I saw her like 3 days ago. Hey, she deals with some symptoms in life, but she's like, she runs her own hairdressing studio. She basically left all that behind, and just an amazing thing. And I have an adopted son who was severely abused and neglected. And we took him in when he was 3 years old. And now he graduated high school. He has his driver's license. He's living with his girlfriend. And he got a job, And it's like, I thought he was going to have to live with me his entire life because he had such trauma and difficulty. And he has developmental disabilities. And by just hard work and caring, and, he's just blossomed to this. He has such a big heart too, And he had the RAD, reactive attachment disorder, diagnosis of a serial killer, like the Russian orphans that don't get touched, it's just so sad, but it's like through kind of love and compassion and hard work, these, I'm trying not to say, oh, I'm great. I'm just saying that these things are possible through like perseverance, and these things happen to people, that it doesn't have to be a miracle pill. It can be just like, kind of hard work and discipline in these areas and compassion for people, and things can change, So thanks for letting me, drop those stories too.
Yeah, I appreciate those. I think those are very valuable stories for people to hear. Well, thank you for taking so much time to speak with me today and sharing all your knowledge and wisdom and expertise. I'd love to have you on again in the future sometime.
Honor to be on. I really appreciate it. I saw your picture. I don't know, like Arden sent me, said, oh, Ethan wants you on. I said, I had a good feeling about you and your level of connection. I'm sure you're like me and you can't take compliments, but I really appreciate your interviewing style. You got great gut instincts. You ask great questions, and you just got a great presence. So I'm really, I'm thankful to be on, and I hope your audience can appreciate you like I do.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ethan.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Awaken Empower TV with my special guest, Jim Vieira. Join me next week as we speak with another incredible individual who's standing on leading edge and changing the world.